Welcome to part 2 of the series. Today we will be tackling dependency injection and Typescript. We are going to be covering dependency injection, dependency containers. We will have a really brief look at inversion of control. It's used for decoupling layers, but for now it's not really important yet. Then I will be doing a live coding example using Inversify and Express, where we create a very minimal web server. And at the very end you will get an assignment, which is again test driven, where you create your own dependency container. Okay, so what is dependency injection? Like in part 1, we created our service repository pattern, and maybe you've already noticed it. If you look at this constructor, we are saying that the class expects a user service, and that in its own is dependency injection. We are saying if you create a new user controller, so if you look at this bit, then we need to give it a dependency, and the dependency in this case is a user service. So why is this called dependency injection? Why do we need it? Well, we need it because let's imagine this constructor is empty, right? Then we in here on line 2 we need to say private read-only user service of type user service equals new user service. So now the user controller has a direct relationship with the user service class, which is wrong because you can't change it. You can't testing it makes it harder for testing. You're tightly coupled, all that kind of stuff. So instead we inject it. So we say, okay, in our constructor we expect a user service of type user service, and then we add it to our class. I hope that makes a little bit sense. We will definitely get more in depth with this later on. Okay, so dependency injection needs a dependency container. Ignore the middle and the right part for now. I'm very bad at PowerPoint and I couldn't be bothered. But if we look at this, our dependency container will have a lot of dependencies. So we could say register a user service class to our dependency container, register the user controller, and register the user repository. So at this point, our dependency container has a relation with the service, controller, and repository. But now in our dependency container, we can say, hey, dependency container, I want you to assemble packages. So let's say one package would be the user service and the user repository. Because like in part 1, we said that the user service has a dependency on the user repository, right? So what if those two could be one package? So if you look at this, let's imagine this is our user service and this is our user repository. So now you're going to be saying, hey container, those two should be one package together. So you get this big package, and this big package defines the rules of how it should be injected. So we're saying, hey, in this big package, user repository is injected inside our user service. Okay, awesome. Now our dependency container has a big package which knows how to assemble the user service with the user repository. Okay, we also have this user controller package. I didn't draw this out, but you can imagine that after this we have another package, and this package would be the user controller, which gets this package, which is the user service, which already has the user repository. So okay, now cool, we have this big package of our user controller, which knows how to get the user service, and the user service knows how to get the user repository, because we created those two packages. Okay, our container is done. Awesome. Now let's say we want to use our user controller. So we create a new user. You technically do not create a new user controller. You either ask the container for a user controller, which is also called the locator pattern, but don't worry about that. But let's imagine we ask the container for the user controller. Generally, you would be calling a method like get or resolve. So you would say in code container.get user controller. And the container is going to be looking at, hey, where is this package for this user controller? It grabs the package, sends it back to the user, which gives us the user controller. So you can see it sends this package, and you get your user controller, which already has the service injected. So we don't have to do new user controller. has a new user service, and this new user service has a new user repository. That's all done in the container. So the only thing we are doing is, hey, container.get user controller, we get this big package, and everything works. That's the gist of the dependency container. Now let's have a look at a different concept. Well, not a different concept, a concept that adds on top of this, and that's called inversion of control. Inversion of control is something we use to decouple layers. Don't worry about it too much, but decoupling layers means, let's say we create two folders. One folder would be called logic, and one folder would be called controllers. Now inside logic, I only want my user services, and inside my controllers folder, I only want my controllers folder. And those two folders should not depend on each other directly. To explain this better, let's have a look at this example. Let's imagine that this line is a boundary. So everything across this line, so let's say this user service does not know about this user repository because it's out of the boundary. So to say, to tell the outside world, so behind this boundary or line, that we expect a user repository, we need to create a port. A port is a Typescript interface, and this interface could have all the methods and properties. So we could say, okay, so we create a iUser repository interface, and this interface needs to have one method, and this method is going to be named createUser. So this port has an interface which expects a method of createUser. So now on the different layer, so this is a new layer, right? So we have layer A, layer B. On this layer, we need to create an adapter. An adapter is just a class that, well, it has many definitions, but in this case, it's a class that implements this port. So you're going to be saying class user repository implements iUser repository. So this user repository knows what it needs to create because the port defines all the rules. And the user service doesn't really know about this user repository. It just knows about this port. And because we have our dependency container, we can assemble all the stuff in our dependency container without telling the user service what user repository is. It only knows about this port. I know this is a bit vague, but we will definitely get into this later on because the search is pretty long and I don't want to get too in depth with some concepts. But this is just to give you a general idea of what it all is and what you could be looking at. So I would strongly advise to do some own research and see what it's all about. But I hope this gives you some insight of what inversion of control is. Okay, so how do we implement the dependency container? I've taken pretty much the same code from part 1, maybe a little bit different, but the concept is the same. We're using service repository pattern, and then injecting the repository into the service into the controller, and if we call the index method, it should be using the user service. As you can see, it's getting users from user service, and then it returns us the current users, as you can see here. So the thing that we want to get rid of is this bit. So to get started, we need to add a few packages. Inversify and Inversify Express utils. Inversify is for our container. Inversify Express utils is to make our life a little bit easier with HTTP controllers. We need to add reflect metadata, which is used for decorators, and to do the magic injection for us, so we don't have to do container.get. And we need to add the types for Inversify. Okay, let's run it. Nothing should be changed. And inside here, we need to create our container for our dependencies, right? So a new container, which gets imported from Inversify. And we need to create a server from Inversify Express utils, as you can see here. And this one expects the container. And then we can get our Express app by doing server.build. App.listen, give the port, the basic stuff, right? Server connected, on HTTP localhost 5000. Save. And now it's going to complain, hey, reflect.has own metadata is not a function. So we need to import reflect metadata. And then it's going to give us a different error, which is going to be saying something about a missing controller, I think. No controllers have been found. So if we go to our user controller, we need to add a decorator called control and give it a route, users. Now it's still going to be mad because it doesn't have, the container doesn't have any dependencies. But if you go to our user service and our user controller, you can see that we are trying to do dependency injection. So let's call our container, which has a method called bind. And inside bind, we are going to say, hey, we want to add user repository to self. This just makes, this just tells it user, if we ask for user repository in our constructor, then use this one. Let's also do it for the user service. Save. And now it's going to complain that we need to add more decorators again. So we need to tell it that the class is injectable. Now it's happy, current user 0, but that's still the old stuff. So let's remove all this, get rid of this log, save it, and now it's going to be mad. I'm actually not sure why it's mad. No controllers have been found. Because we need to import the controllers. And this comes from Inversify Express. So this one. So if we save this and we scroll down here, it says server connected on HTTP localhost 5000. If I click on it and we go to users, should still not work because in our controller we need to add one more decorator, which creates the route for us. So now in here we're saying, hey, this index method is going to have a route of this, which is prefixed with users. So to translate, it's going to be users / save, refresh this, current user 0. So right now you can see, if you go to Bootstrap, this container creates the package, and we do nothing to actually do the injection, right? Because this is doing it for us. We are just saying, if we go to our user controller, we want a user service to be injected. But we're not doing it ourselves, because before we had to do new user controller, and then new user service, new user repository. But that isn't needed anymore, because the dependency container is doing that for us. Okay, so I'm gonna leave it with this. But I want to strongly advise you to have a look into Inversify. There are also different dependency containers. But I think this one is a good entry point because it has a lot of built-in features. And also maybe have a quick look at Inversion of Control, because right now we are still not doing any inversion of control. So just like last time, I created a new repository with some test-driven assignments for you. In this test, you will be creating your own dependency container. But please do note, we are not 100% creating a dependency container. We are making use of the locator pattern. Doesn't really matter, but just to clarify, we are making use of the locator pattern. But the principle is the same, and just to get the idea across, it doesn't really matter. So go to my repository, I will put a link in my description, go to code, get this link, clone it. Then you'll end up with this project. In this project, if you go to package.json, there are two scripts, test container, test final. Do them in this order. Do test container first, get all the test green, move to test final. Test container will be about the container.ts, and test final is about bootstrap.ts, which uses the user controller.spec.ts. Inside here, there's a note for you to read. It imports the container, hint, hint, you need to do something with it. And this repository is something you don't touch at all. You do need to touch this though. When that's done, feel free to share it with me. I really liked it that people shared it in the first part, and otherwise you will have to wait for part 3. To quickly give some information about where the series is going, we will have a few more parts. I'm not sure how many because I'm pretty much improvising this, but I believe that the next one will actually be a video where we are going to be looking at a code base of a content creator by the name of Web Dev Simplified, where we refactor it with the current patterns and concepts that we have learned so far. When that's done, we will move to some more concepts, work it out even more, and eventually we will end up with a layer architecture. But do note it's a traditional layer architecture, so it isn't really a layer architecture that's considered perfect or good in any sense. But it does give you a really great entry point of moving to some more advanced architectures. I should also note I'm still learning myself. I recently got into domain-driven design. I got someone coaching me, still studying all those concepts, but I hope that I'm giving you some more insight on those concepts, and maybe we can even study along eventually. So yeah, good luck with this assignment. I'm not going to be doing it myself. In the repository there's a separate branch actually called complete version, which you can look at to see if you have done it right.